All right, everyone, let's dive right in. We're going deep today into the world of international students in Canada.
A lot going on.
Definitely, and especially with those protests we've been seeing.
Students demanding work permit extensions.
Exactly right, yeah. And we're going to unpack all that and even more.
Even more than the protests.
Oh, yeah. We're basing this whole deep dive on a recent interview with Immigration Minister Mark Miller himself.
Wow, so this is straight from the source.
Straight from the horse's mouth, as they say. And it's really important stuff, I think, if you're studying in Canada right now or even just thinking about it.
For sure, because it sounds like things are changing.
Absolutely shifting, for sure.
You know, it's really striking, I think, how these protests are just the tip of the iceberg.
What do you mean?
Well, they kind of reveal a deeper tension going on in Canada.
Oh, interesting.
You see, so many international students come to Canada with this hope, right?
Mm-hmm.
This hope that it'll be their ticket to permanent residency.
Right.
But at the same time, the government is sending a pretty clear message.
What message is that?
That it's not guaranteed, this permanent residency.
Yeah, Miller definitely didn't beat around the bush or anything, did he?
He did not.
Basically came right out and said, look, just because you come here to study doesn't mean you get to stay permanently.
Straight up.
I can imagine how that would be a shock for some students, especially those who have invested, a lot.
Invested so much, their time, their energy, their money.
Everything. Their lives, practically.
It definitely challenges what a lot of people thought was, a given.
A sure thing.
Right, a sure thing. And I think it's more than just some dashed dreams, It's potentially a real turning point, like a hinge in history for how Canada manages its whole immigration system.
That's huge. So you're saying this isn't about, shutting the door on immigrants?
No, not that at all.
But more about, adjusting the system a little bit?
Exactly, fine-tuning it.
Fine-tuning, okay.
Think of it like this. Canada needs skilled workers.
That's for sure.
We all know that. But at the same time, the government is trying to manage some other things.
Like what?
Like the strain on housing and public services.
Yeah, for sure.
All those things are feeling the pressure with the growing population.
Absolutely. It's a real balancing act, for sure.
A tricky balance.
So that probably explains why the government decided to do this thing, right?
What thing is that?
Cut back on temporary residence, which unfortunately includes our international students.
By about 20%.
Oof, that's a big chunk. But in real terms, what does that even look like?
So estimates are that this means about 75,000 fewer student visas will be issued.
75,000. Wow. And are different provinces going to feel this differently?
Definitely. Ontario, for example, is probably going to see a bigger impact.
Because of all the universities there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Compared to, say, a province that doesn't have as many.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So if you're an international student right now in Ontario,
you're probably feeling a little stressed, I'd say.
Absolutely. And then there's that whole work permit extension issue we talked about before.
Yeah, the students are really demanding them.
But Miller seems pretty firm on his stance.
I think it was something about labor market needs, right?
Exactly. He basically said that extensions will only be granted if Canada actually needs those specific skills,
So let's say I'm studying something super niche.
With not a lot of jobs in that field.
Exactly. Not a lot of jobs. So even if I'm a straight-A student, my chances of staying in Canada,
after all your hard work,
could just depend on whether the job market needs my skills at that exact moment.
It could.
Kind of feels a little random.
It definitely adds some uncertainty to the whole situation.
For sure.
And I think it highlights a potential shift in how Canada is thinking about things,
Oh, tell me more about that.
So instead of a system where studying here almost automatically leads to work and then maybe permanent residency,
Right.
It's becoming more about aligning immigration with what the economy needs right now, immediately.
Okay, that makes sense. But there's another piece of this whole puzzle that I'm stuck on.
What's that?
The student direct stream.
Or SDS, as everyone calls it.
Yeah, the SDS. It's being shut down, right?
It is.
And this was a fast track to get study permits, especially for students from India, wasn't it?
It was. So what happened? Why the sudden change?
Yeah, it's kind of a head scratcher.
Well, it's interesting, right? It was supposed to make things easier, streamline the process.
Uh-huh.
But according to Miller, it kind of became, clunky.
Clunky.
Yeah, he even said it started to affect Canada's international relations.
Wait, seriously? What does he even mean by international relations? how can a study permit program mess with those?
That's the intriguing part, right? It's not totally spelled out, but if you kind of read between the lines, it seems like the SDS, with its focus on certain countries like India, might have raised some eyebrows, diplomatically speaking.
Oh, what's it?
Like maybe other countries felt it was giving an unfair advantage or that it wasn't reciprocal.
So it's kind of like international chess, where even a study permit program can become like a bargaining chip.
Exactly. It just goes to show you how interconnected these things really are.
For sure.
Domestic immigration policies can have ripple effects on the global stage.
Wow.
And in this case, it seems like managing those international relationships led to the SDS being, well, sacrificed.
Oh, wow. Okay, this is getting really complex.
It is.
So we've got a system trying to balance economic needs, anxieties about housing and resources.
All while trying to navigate some pretty delicate international relations.
Exactly. And in the middle of all of this, you have these international students feeling the pressure.
Exactly. It's like Canada's trying to thread a very fine needle here.
Yeah.
And for students, I think the message is pretty clear.
What's that?
That staying in Canada is becoming less about following a predictable path and more about adapting to a constantly shifting landscape.
And that brings us to another potentially tricky issue that Miller mentioned, asylum claims. He expressed some concern about international students using asylum claims as a way to stay in Canada, even if they don't have a legitimate reason.
That's a really important point to think about, and it needs to be considered carefully.
Absolutely.
On one hand, we have this asylum system that is designed to protect people.
People fleeing persecution.
Exactly. And it's a cornerstone of international law.
And of Canada's values.
Absolutely. But then on the other hand,
there are concerns about the system being misused.
Yeah, maintaining the integrity of that system is really important.
So it's about finding that balance again.
Right, protecting those who need it while making sure the system isn't being taken advantage of.
For sure.
It's a conversation that needs to happen with, sensitivity.
Definitely.
Recognizing both the humanitarian side of things and the need for a strong and fair immigration system.
So where do we go from here? We've got shifting policies, students facing uncertainty.
And a government trying to do a lot of different things at once.
Right. Where do we go from here?
Well, let's take a closer look at how all these changes might actually play out.
Oh, you mean like on the ground in real life?
Exactly. Because while Miller's statements give us the big picture,
right,
the real question is, what does this mean for you, the listener?
Okay, let's get specific. What should international students be paying attention to right now?
That's the big question.
What are the practical takeaways from all of this?
I think that's where we start to see how these changes, these policies, can have very real consequences for people,
Oh, yeah.
For example, that 20% reduction in temporary residence, well, that's going to affect how many students universities can accept.
Oh, wow.
We could see way more competition.
For those limited spots.
Especially in those popular programs.
So it's not even just about getting into Canada anymore.
Right.
It's about getting into the specific program you want.
Which might be a lot harder now.
Wow, that's a big deal. And what about those post-graduation work permits?
Well, with this focus on labor market needs, getting one of those could be a lot more challenging.
For certain graduates.
Right, like if you're in a field where there's not a lot of demand, even if you're a top student.
You might graduate, but still not be able to get a work permit.
And not be able to stay in Canada.
That's tough.
It is, and I think it shows how important it is for students to be proactive.
What do you mean?
To do their research.
Right.
To really understand how things are changing.
So we're seeing the real impact of these policies starting to take shape.
We are.
But what about the bigger picture? Where does all this leave Canada?
That's a really interesting question, and I think it's worth exploring.
Okay, tell me more.
Because these changes, while they're trying to address some specific challenges,
right,
also raise some fundamental questions about what Canada is all about its identity as a nation.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. What kind of questions?
Well, let's start with fairness.
Okay.
Is it fair to attract these international students?
With certain promises, right?
Exactly, only to change the rules later on.
That's a tough one for sure.
It is.
Because on one hand, Canada has the right to adjust its policies.
Of course.
But on the other, these students made some pretty big life decisions based on certain expectations.
Yeah, it raises questions about Canada's commitment to global talent,
Oh, interesting.
Are we shifting away from attracting the best and brightest?
And just trying to fill immediate needs.
Exactly.
And if that's the case, what does it mean for Canada in the long run?
What about our competitiveness on the world stage?
Can a country really thrive if it only focuses on the skills it needs right now?
Those are the big questions we're left with, and I think they're important.
I agree. This has been a deep dive for sure. Lots of layers to peel back.
Many layers.
We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still so much more to talk about.
There is.
Stay tuned, everyone.
You know, I think it's fascinating how all of this, ties back to a bigger conversation about what Canada wants, what it wants its future to look like.
Oh, yeah. Like what specifically?
Well, Miller kind of hinted at it when he talked about Canada's aging population.
Oh, right.
We need people, right?
We need workers
To keep things going.
to support our economy. Yeah,
Our social programs down the line.
all that. And it seems like, on the surface at least, that bringing in all these young, skilled workers would be the obvious solution, wouldn't it?
It would seem that way. But it sounds like the pace of things, especially with temporary residents, was causing some concern.
Causing some concern. What do you mean?
Well, think about it. If you have this sudden influx of people, it puts pressure on everything, right?
Yeah, like housing.
Housing for sure, healthcare,
Oh, yeah, those are already strained.
even public transportation.
Everything.
It's like trying to cram a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah, that never works.
It just doesn't.
Yeah.
So while Canada clearly needs these immigrants, it's about managing that influx in a way that works for everybody already here.
Right, so it has to be sustainable.
Sustainable, yes.
And that's where this calibrated approach comes in, right?
I think so, yeah.
Instead of just opening the doors wide, the government's trying to be more, strategic?
Exactly. More strategic, more deliberate.
And remember how Miller talked about all that collaboration?
Between the federal government, the provinces.
And even the schools, the educational institutions.
That's right. I think that suggests a move away from this one-size-fits-all approach to something more tailored.
So instead of just setting one big immigration target for the whole country,
Right.
they're thinking about matching those policies to the specific needs of different regions.
You got it. So, a province with a huge tech sector might need a lot of software developers right now.
While another province with a healthcare crisis might need nurses.
See? It makes sense.
That's pretty brilliant when you think about it. Instead of just looking at the big picture,
It's zooming in.
you're zooming in on those smaller, those micro needs.
It's like a puzzle where each province is a piece and they all need to fit together for it to work.
I love that. And that's what makes all of this so fascinating to talk about.
Right.
It's not just about numbers.
It's strategy. It's a plan.
Okay, so we're starting to see how this calibrated approach could work in theory. But let's be realistic.
Okay.
There are always going to be people who say Canada should just stop immigration completely,
Oh, absolutely. It's a complex issue and people have strong feelings about it.
especially when the economy isn't doing so great or when there are cultural changes happening.
All of that factors in. But Miller was very clear on this point. Stopping immigration completely would be disastrous for Canada.
Yeah, he didn't even entertain that idea, did he?
Not even for a second. He said it would basically cripple the economy.
Especially with our aging population.
Right. And all those labor shortages everyone's talking about.
It would be like shooting ourselves in the foot.
Exactly. Like pulling the rug out from under ourselves.
We need those workers
Those skilled workers, those new ideas.
to keep the country moving forward.
Absolutely. So instead of hitting the brakes completely,
It's more of a speed adjustment.
a speed adjustment. I like that. It's not about stopping. It's about finding a pace that's, sustainable.
Efficient.
And that's where this whole collaboration thing comes back in.
Right, because the federal government sets the overall direction,
The big picture.
but it's the provinces and schools that are on the ground working directly with people, understanding what's actually needed.
We see the day-to-day.
It's like fine-tuning the engine, making sure it's running smoothly
And it's about attracting the right talent at the right pace.
to fuel Canada's growth.
Yeah,
So it sounds like we're seeing a real shift happening here
a transition.
in how Canada approaches immigration.
It's becoming more dynamic.
More responsive, less predictable.
And for international students, that means the old way of thinking, the old playbook, might not work anymore.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Simply coming here to study isn't enough anymore.
What do you mean?
Well, they need to be really savvy about things.
Yeah.
They need to understand how the landscape is changing, how their skills fit into the bigger picture.
Wow, it's almost like international students need to become experts in Canadian immigration policy themselves.
There's some truth to that. It is getting more and more complex.
For sure.
But the good news is there are resources out there.
Oh, good. Like what?
Schools have resources, there are immigration consultants, even online forums.
So there's a lot of information out there.
A wealth of information.
That's good to know.
So it's not about shutting down your dreams.
It's about being smart being prepared.
And being ready to adapt.
Yeah, adjusting your approach as needed. We've talked a lot about the policy side of things.
Right.
But I can't help but think about the people, you know?
The human side of all of this.
What are these changes really like for students?
I think that's such a crucial point.
Yeah.
And honestly, it often gets overlooked in all these debates.
Oh yeah, we get caught up in the big picture, the numbers.
But imagine this. You're a student who came to Canada with this dream of building a life here.
You invest your time, your money, your energy.
And then suddenly the rules change.
Everything you thought you knew is different.
That's got to be incredibly frustrating.
Heartbreaking even.
It can be. And I think we need to acknowledge that emotional toll, that feeling of, betrayal some students might be feeling.
Yeah, it's not their fault the rules changed.
Exactly. They came here in good faith.
They followed the rules.
And then the goalposts move.
That's so tough. And it's not just about individual dreams either.
No, it's not.
It's about families.
Communities, entire support system.
All affected by these changes.
You're so right. It's a ripple effect. It spreads outward.
Like, think about those parents who worked so hard to send their kid to Canada.
Or spouses who uprooted their whole lives.
To support their partner's studies.
Exactly. These policy shifts have this huge impact that goes way beyond the individual.
It really underscores the need for understanding on both sides, doesn't it?
It does.
Like, the government needs to see that human cost, the impact on real people.
Right, and students need to be proactive in adapting to this new reality.
It's about finding that middle ground, that shared understanding.
Exactly. It's not about blame. It's about recognizing how complicated this is.
And working together to find solutions that actually work.
Solutions that are practical but also humane.
Well said. So where do we go from here? What can these students actually do?
What can they do to navigate this new, less predictable landscape?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. And there's no easy answer, but I think the first step is shifting your mindset.
What do you mean?
It's no longer about assuming you'll get permanent residency.
Right.
It's about being open to exploring different options, figuring out what your strengths are, and being willing to adjust.
So instead of putting all your eggs in one basket.
You diversify your approach.
That makes sense.
Think of it like building a portfolio of skills and experiences that show Canada your value.
Oh, I like that.
That might mean pursuing a specific degree or getting work experience.
Internships, volunteer.
Even learning French or another language.
So it's about showcasing your skills.
Showing your commitment to Canada.
Proving that you're here for the long haul.
Exactly, but it's also about being realistic.
Right, things have changed.
That path to permanent residency might be longer, more winding than you thought it would be.
But it's not impossible.
Not at all. It just requires some creativity, some resilience.
And a willingness to embrace the unexpected.
Exactly. I think that's actually pretty inspiring when you think about it.
It is, because, yeah, the rules are changing, but that doesn't mean you have to give up on your dreams.
You just have to be more resourceful, more adaptable.
Okay, I love that. It's like a challenge, a puzzle to solve.
And you have to convince Canada why you deserve to be here.
Show them what you've got.
And sometimes those detours, those unexpected twists and turns.
They lead to amazing places.
Exactly. You never know where you might end up. You know, it's really interesting how cities are kind of becoming these like mini versions of Canada's whole immigration story.
Oh, how so?
Well, think about it, right? Cities are often that first place newcomers land when they get here.
Yeah, that's true.
It's where they find jobs, housing.
And it's where they start their new lives.
And it's where all those different cultures start to like mix and change and evolve.
So you're saying cities are kind of like the testing grounds for Canada's multicultural experiment. Is that what you're getting at?
That's a great way to put it. It's where those big ideas about diversity and inclusion are actually happening in real life.
That makes sense. And because cities are dealing with these things firsthand,
All the time.
they're starting to take on a bigger role, it seems, in actually shaping immigration policy, right?
Right. They're getting more proactive.
Wait, really? I always thought immigration was totally a federal thing.
It is, mostly. But cities are finding ways to have their voices heard.
How? How can they actually influence those policies?
Well, in a few ways. First, they're advocating for policies that work for them specifically.
Oh, I see. Like, remember how we talked about those micro-targeted approaches?
Yeah.
Where different provinces might need different skills.
Right. Well, cities are doing the same thing. They're saying, hey, we need more of this or less of that.
You need more nurses or engineers or teachers.
Exactly. And they're working with the federal government to create programs that actually target those needs.
So it's not just about saying come to Canada anymore.
It's more nuanced than that.
It's about saying come to our city And here's what we can offer you.
Here's the support you need.
Here are the opportunities, the jobs.
And it's a smart move because when immigrants do well, the city does well.
Everybody wins. It's like a win-win.
Exactly. It's about creating a system where everyone benefits from these diverse talents and perspectives.
I love that. It's like cities are these little laboratories for innovation and immigration, right?
Yeah.
Trying new things.
Figuring out what works.
And then sharing those ideas with other cities.
Exactly. And it's really exciting to see this happening. Cities are recognizing their power, you know?
Yeah.
They're shaping the future of immigration.
And they're doing it in a way that creates more inclusive, more vibrant communities.
For everyone.
Okay, so we've explored the role of cities. And I have a feeling we're getting close to wrapping up this incredible conversation.
We are.
What's the final piece of the puzzle here? What haven't we talked about yet?
Well, we've talked about all these changes, the challenges, the uncertainties.
Right.
But amidst all of that, I think there's this sense of hope, too.
Oh, tell me more about that.
There's this recognition that Canada's immigration system, while it's not perfect,
It has its flaws, yeah.
it's still evolving, still trying to be better.
Okay, I like that. So it's not about giving up or getting discouraged.
Not at all.
It's about recognizing those complexities and then working towards solutions.
Exactly. And that's where dialogue comes in, critical thinking, having these tough conversations.
That's where the real progress happens, you're saying.
I think so. It's not just about listening to this deep dive.
It's about taking these ideas, these questions, and talking about them with other people.
Right. With your friends, your family, your elected officials.
Share your perspective.
Challenge those assumptions. Be part of shaping a better system.
I love that. You know, what I'm taking away from all of this is that immigration is not just about policy. It's about people.
It is.
It's about hopes, dreams, you know, the desire for a better life. Changing, even though it's getting more complicated.
A human desire, that drive, it doesn't go away.
It's still there, pushing people forward.
You said that beautifully. And amidst all the data, the policies, the debates, there's this profound human story happening.
Oh, I like that. A story of resilience, of adaptation, of hope.
And it's a story we're all a part of, whether we're immigrants ourselves or just citizens of this amazing country.
And it's a story that's still being written, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's keep talking about it.
Keep asking those tough questions.
Keep pushing for change.
And work together to create a Canada that we can all be proud of.
This deep dive has been incredible, truly enlightening.
I agree.
We've gone deep, explored so many layers of this issue.
From the policy changes to those big questions about who we are as a nation.
Exactly. And it's been a pleasure unpacking all of this with you.
Likewise. And to everyone listening, I hope this has been informative, thought-provoking, maybe even a little challenging.
We've covered a lot of ground today, but this is just the beginning of the conversation, really.
It is. And as Canada adjusts its policies, we all need to think about what those long-term effects will be.
What will it mean for Canada's ability to attract talent, to stay competitive on the world stage?
Those are big questions, important questions.
So keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive.